Blog Talk Radio.
I can't help it when I look at you. Nothing but American dreaming. Whoa, 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 whoa. It's my dream.
And welcome back to Edward Jones Presents CEO in 10. I'm Rick Tocquigny. Our very special guest today is Aaron Hackett of 80/20 Brand. A little bit about Aaron. He has had an illustrious career that started at Procter & Gamble. He was there as a brand manager, went on to work for ConAgra, and now oversees the great company 80/20 Brand, and it was founded originally in 2008 as Hackett Consulting. They have a really simple, profound mission, and that's to bring billion-dollar brand strategy to small businesses. And boy, that's so timely today, since most of our listening audience are entrepreneurs and company founders. In 2018, Hackett Consulting renamed the company to 80/20 Brand to be more precisely describing its strategic approach, and their client base is astounding. It has included Downy and Febreze and Roto-Rooter. And so, Aaron, we are so glad to have you on today. Welcome to CEO in 10.
I'm happy to be here, Rick. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. And Aaron, as is a tradition on this show, we want you to fill in the gaps on your career journey and give us a few highlights that you think led you to wanting to own your own company and make a difference like you are today with 80/20 Brand.
Okay, my career is different than most in my position. I started out as an engineer. I have two engineering degrees, and I worked as an engineer for 4 years. But it became apparent that I should go back and get my MBA, and that MBA experience was great. I learned a lot. But I felt the learning wasn't adequate. So I heard about this place called Procter & Gamble. It was supposed to be a great training ground. So I applied, and I was fortunately accepted. And I started out there, but enjoyed the experience, learned a lot, got married there, had my first child. As you mentioned, I went to ConAgra. I worked there for about 1.5 years after the 7.5 years at P&G because I had an opportunity to run their flagship business, Healthy Choice. And at that point, my wife, who was also working at Procter & Gamble, but in the legal department, she's an intellectual property attorney. During her second maternity leave, she got an opportunity to go work at Coca-Cola. And this is 9 years after I started at Procter & Gamble. We had always wanted to be in Atlanta, and I mean, when it comes down to it, we looked at her package and my package, and her package was bigger than mine, so we had to make the prudent decision. Everything lined up, so we moved to Atlanta, and I had a couple of offers from other billion-dollar CPG companies, but at that point in my career, I could have done the jobs and I would have been fine, but my learning curve, the reason I went to P&G to begin with, started to flatten out, and I thought about what would help me continue to grow and learn, and that's why I decided to start out with Hackett Consulting, because I knew there was going to be a lot of learning, a lot of challenge, and I started that in 2008. Started out slowly, but I slowly built up momentum, got clients, did a lot of things that I tried out, and then I've changed my direction, and then last year, as you mentioned, I switched from Hackett Consulting to 80/20 Brand, and here I am now.
What a great story. And listen, of all the wonderful core values that you and I share as fellow Procter alum, what do you think is central to the culture of your company at 80/20 Brand Builder that you drew straight from the ivory tower in Cincinnati?
I mean, it's that base fundamental principle of how to approach problems. And I'll say it like this. Remember I said I learned a lot in business school? And then I learned a lot at Procter & Gamble. The learning at Procter & Gamble was different. You learned a lot, but it was what I talk about, the 80-20 rule. Most people are familiar that 20% of effort gives you 80% of results. When you're a brand manager at Procter & Gamble, there's a lot of common best practices that are shared, but every time you learn one, you got to get focused on what's most important. So the ability to get focused on what you can apply to your brand immediately and the focus on that 20% that drives the 80% was the thing or the concept or the approach, if you would call it, that I held closest to me.
Thank you for mentioning that, because the entrepreneurs that listen to our show, Aaron, I believe across the board could use some medicine when it comes to prioritizing what their time and where best to spend their time, because there's so many things coming at them from all different directions. And when you're starting a business and you're supposed to be wearing all these hats, and you don't have a board of directors or advisors to tell you what to do today when you get up, that there is such conflict there. So what could you advise our young entrepreneurs that are company founders that listen to this show about using the 80-20 rule in their lives today?
Oh, yeah. I have a good answer for that, but let me step back. I want to give you some foundation, and I'm going to answer that question.
Okay. One
of the things that happened when I started Hackett Consulting was I recognized that I was more of a business-to-business rather than a business-to-consumer, and I recognized the marketing outreach was a little different. So I started going out and connecting with people, and I started giving guest lectures at Georgia Tech. I gave those guest lectures for about 2 or 3 years, and then in 2013, the person who taught brand management at Georgia Tech, he ended up leaving. So I've been teaching that course there ever since. I teach it every semester at the MBA and undergraduate level. Now, the reason that I start out with that is I am in the fortunate situation at a school like Georgia Tech to see entrepreneurs on a regular basis. I've had meetings with them in the last month on what they might do. As a matter of fact, there's an organization called CreateX at Georgia Tech, and I am scheduled to give them a presentation on brand 1 week from today. So That's background, just so you understand where I'm coming from. Now I want to answer your question. What do I tell entrepreneurs? Now, the entrepreneurs I see, and like I said, it's an incubator at Georgia Tech, so I see a lot of them. They're thinking about, the MVPs and lean startup and financing and all these other things, but my guidance is your startup is a brand. And it occurred to me as I talked to some of these startups, when you tell them, that you do brand management, they think about brand elements. They think about logos, brand names, colors. That's a part of brand, but that's the outer part. What I try to talk about is I talk about the inner part, the brand equity, what your brand stands for in the heart and minds of consumers. So the overall guidance I give them is your startup is a brand, so the fundamentals that help build a brand are the same fundamentals that can help build your startup. And then the thing that I focus on specifically is the first rule that I think that many brands mess up on, and connecting to that 80-20 rule, figure out who your 80-20 target is. Startups, they get excited and they want everybody to buy their product, but I have example after example of how when you get very focused, you can meet the needs of a few. When I say few, I don't mean but a small percentage, much better than you could a broader swath. And I have many examples to back this up, but what I've called the target and the way that I teach it is I call that target the 80-20 target. And I've looked at companies that I've consulted with through 80-20 brand, and those companies tend to be smaller. So they don't have a marketing staff, because when they have a marketing staff, they're less likely to reach out to consultants. But I have they've given me their data to help them execute these programs. And as they list out, as I get their sales and their consumer revenue, and I sort them from most to least, the top 20% of their customers tend to give them about 80% of their revenue. And there's example after example, from the launch of Crest White Strips, what they did, to a client that I had that sold hair weaves. It just happens over and over again. So if a startup can really get focused on who their 80-20 target is, it's important. And the last thing I'll say on that, decades ago, we used to talk about target as demographics, right? A certain age, a certain gender. And then we moved a little further along, and we started talking about it psychographically. This is what they think. This is what we believe. And that works well. The problem with psychographic, though, is we really don't know what people think. And then when we ask them questions, sometimes they tell us what we want to hear. So what I push when I drive entrepreneurs to figure out who their 80-20 target is pick the behavior. What is the specific behavior? So, in an example, when I was working at Procter & Gamble, Eukanuba, remember we used to own dog food. Mm-hmm. They were telling me about who what we call them prime prospect at P&G, who their prime prospect is. Eukanuba is an expensive dog food. And I started out, with the demographic, somebody who might be wealthy. Then I went psychographic, somebody who loves their dog or thinks of them as a family member. That's psychographic. But how do you really tell? And what they used was a behavior. The people who tended to spend more money on dog food were the people who celebrated their dog's birthday. That specific behavior.
That's going deep into the marrow of your consumable product, and that's what it's all about. It's that deep focus. So I trust that the listeners of this show today, of which part are Fortune 500 brand managers and small entrepreneurs, they want to get in touch with you, Aaron, to learn more about your services. What's the best way for them to be in touch with you at 80-20 Brand?
Okay, there's two ways. One is on Twitter. My username is Aaron Hackett, at AARONHACKETT, just like my name is spelled. Or you can go to 8020brand.com and contact me there. And, if you want, my personal email address is Aaron at 8020brand.com.
Excellent. And as is a tradition on this show, Aaron, we close every show by asking, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
The advice I'd give to my 20-year-old self is the advice that I wrote in the epilogue of 80-20 Brand, and it's the advice I give my MBA and undergraduate students every semester. And a lot of students, they get lots of advice, so they don't want to hear a lot. But that piece of advice is embrace your failures. Something about being a type A personality, trying to do something, failure doesn't tend to sit well with you. And as a marketer, I was taught how to spin my failures or how to justify my failures. But when I got to the point in my career and built up the confidence to sit down and really absorb and meditate on my failures, that's when I made the biggest improvements in my career. So embrace your failures.
And do it quickly. Aaron, it's been an honor to have you on, and we'd love to have you back on again, especially to hear some summary notes from this brand presentation that you're about to give. So if you are willing to extend your mentoring to a few 100,000 extra people here, that would be an honor for us to have you back on.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Rick. I do appreciate it.
You bet. That was Aaron Hackett, CEO, founder of 80-20 Brand. What a great guy, so commonsensical. And if you want to contact them, make sure to go to 80-20 Brand and check them out today. Some of the brands that he's worked on again and have included Downy and Febreze, Roto-Rooter, and many others. It sounds like that he will be able to help your brand regardless of the size, because he's got this wonderful process and engineering approach to brand management. We want to thank Edward Jones for continued sponsorship of this Life Lessons CEO show. We go to Serban.Maracine when it comes to financial advice, and you can contact him at SERBAN.MARACINE at edwardjones.com. That's Serban.Maracine at edwardjones.com. And we know that the market is fluctuating, as it always is. And what Serban would want us to tell you today is past performance doesn't guarantee any future results. And also that diversification does not guarantee a profit or protect against loss in a declining market. So, hey, there's a reason why we want you to link up with Edward Jones and especially Serban.Maracine when it comes to mapping out your personal plan. I'm Rick Tocquigny. Thanks for joining us on this CEO in 10. As we always say, keep talking, but listen more intently.